The Green Party have set their sights to win 4 seats in Westminster in the election, something they say is within touching distance.
Our latest Good Morning Britain survation poll shows the Green Party are polling at just 7%, and one study suggests they are the party most damaged by tactical voting. So how realistic are those 4 seats? The party's co-leader, Adrian Ramsay, joins us now. Very good morning to you, Mr. Ramsay. So, on a positive note, you know, because we know that our viewers are fed up with parties kind of throwing mud at each other, what would you say to those people who are going to vote tactically? Perhaps they just see you as a protest vote. Perhaps they're undecided. What can you positively say to viewers this morning?
Well, you rightly quoted Susanna and Ed that the Green Party is aiming for 4 seats at this election. And in those 4 seats, in Waveney Valley, in Herefordshire, in Bristol and in Brighton, tactical voting will work in our favour because it's very clear in those seats and voters know that it's going to be between the Green Party and one other party. And so, yes, in terms of our excellent response on the ground, the polls, the tactical voting websites, all the posters in the windows, voters in those seats that know that the Green Party can win and we can get a group of Green MPs in Parliament. And whether people are voting for a Green MP in those areas or voting with their Green vote in any other seat in the country, which I'd encourage people to do, that will send a very clear message to Westminster, to the new government that will be coming in on Friday, that people want bold action, both to defend our environment and to restore our public services.
Let's talk about bold action then. And by the way, because you've specifically mentioned 4 constituencies, we will make sure that out of fairness, all the other candidates in those constituencies are listed alongside your candidates on our website. The IFS say your bold action is wholly unobtainable. That's the Institute for Fiscal Studies, which looks into costings. They say that you're going to do your wealth tax, and it would put a huge burden on the country alongside borrowing. Firstly, what do you say to the fact that it's going to be a huge burden with unpleasant consequences for the country? Because that doesn't sound like a positive. And secondly, we have the highest tax burden in 70 years. So why would you propose more tax?
Well, Susanna, there's been a number of economic commentators who've commented on our manifesto, and Aaron Advani, for example, from the University of Warwick, said it was economically credible. We've engaged with a range of organisations and experts that have given very positive feedback, whether that's the British Dental Association, National Education Union, Nuffield Trust and others, who've recognised that the Green Party is actually highlighting the funding that we do need to put in if we're going to restore our severely overstretched NHS, if we're going to invest in affordable housing, and if we're going to tackle the climate and nature crisis and transition to a green economy in a way that tackles the cost of living crisis we're all facing.
By putting people's taxes up?
Well, we are asking the very richest in society, the multimillionaires, the billionaires, those with over 10 million in wealth and assets, to contribute modestly more. I'm talking about a 1% tax on those with wealth and assets over 10 million. And that could raise tens of billions by the end of this next Parliament. And you quoted the IFS, but they said themselves that there's a conspiracy of silence between Labour and the Conservatives in pretending we can have improvements in our health service without putting the investment in. The IFS says that the next government will either need to cut public services or increase taxes. So the Green Party is the only party that's being honest in this election in saying we do need to put in significant investment if we're going to support our schools, restore our NHS, improve affordable housing. And all of these things do need money, but we can do so by asking those with the broadest shoulders to pay just modestly more. Because actually, if you look at the proportion of GDP that goes into taxes, the UK is near the bottom of the league table across the European countries. And what we're proposing would move us up a bit, but would still be below countries like France in terms of the proportion of tax that we're raising. But it's about what people will gain from that, because at the moment, people are forking out for a private dentist because they can't get an NHS dentist. I was speaking to someone last night who was telling me she'd spent £170 for each of her 2 children to get an NHS a private dental checkup.
So you're, as you say, you're being straightforward about the fact that you would borrow more and that you would put taxes up. Can
I ask you about wider issues? Because clearly what you are talking about with taxes and borrowing is to pursue the Green agenda, the Green Party, wanting to tackle climate change, a very laudable aim. But you've also broadened in this election and you've been exploiting in some communities anger over what's been happening in the Middle East, in Gaza, being very critical of the Prime Minister and Keir Starmer for the stance they've taken. But you've got into some difficulties. You had a Green candidate in Bristol East who you abandoned after he compared the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu to Adolf Hitler. You had another candidate in Bethnal Green who withdrew after saying what she then acknowledged were anti-Semitic statements. You had a candidate, which at the beginning of the month was still a candidate, a guy called Joe Belcher, who said that Israel paid Hamas to carry out the October 7 atrocities. I don't know if Mr Belcher is still a candidate for the Green Party?
Well, Ed, first of all, to be very clear, the Green Party condemns any form of racism and absolutely condemns any form of anti-Semitism. And the comments that you quote there are all unacceptable. And as you say, there were two candidates there who were initially selected who are not on the ballot paper for the Green Party because we went through a process of assessing their comments and it was clear that they should not have gone forward. But we've got 574 candidates.
And how about the third candidate I asked about?
I honestly don't know the answer to that, Ed. We've got 574 candidates standing across the country. I'm afraid I haven't memorised all of those.
I reckon if somebody was reported as saying that Israel paid Hamas to carry out the October 7 atrocity, but I would be amazed if they are still a candidate, and I would be amazed that you wouldn't know about that.
Well, what I could say, Ed, is that is a completely unacceptable comment. I can't say whether or not that person's still a candidate off the top of my head. But what I can say to you is that if any concerns are raised about any of our candidates, they're taken very seriously. There have been instances, as you say yourself, where candidates have withdrawn or been asked to withdraw. And there have been other cases where, perhaps with less serious but still offensive comments, candidates have deleted posts that they've liked on social media that should not have been liked in the first place.
There's also been reports of quite a lot of intimidation in constituencies. Could you just use the platform of Good Morning Britain now to urge your activists, candidates tomorrow on polling day not to get involved in intimidation, in aggressive campaigning, trying to bully people when they come to vote? That would not be something the Greens would ever want to condone, is it?
Well, of course not. No party should do that, and I'm not quite sure why you're raising that specifically. But what I would say, Ed, is that I've signed the Joe Cox Foundation Pledge for Civility in Politics. I know you worked alongside Joe Cox, and we all need to conduct ourselves in public life in a way that it encourages a positive engagement with politics. We should look for where we agree with other politicians. And I've been very clear that if I'm elected as an MP, I won't take a tribal approach. I'll look for areas of agreement, look to be constructive in pushing for improvements on defending our environment and restoring our public services. And particularly if we're talking about sensitive issues like the horrific conflict in Gaza and Israel, the tens of thousands of people who've lost their lives in Gaza, aid not getting through, people's homes being bombed, the horrific attacks of Hamas on the 7th of October, where people are still hostages are still have not been released. We need to be very conscious that Jewish and Muslim communities in the UK and around the world are feeling vulnerable. And so, yes, the Green Party has been very clear that we want to see a ceasefire on both sides. We've called from that from the start. That's been a very popular position. But we have to discuss that issue, and anyone in public life has to discuss that and other sensitive issues in a way that understands that people are vulnerable and that we need to talk in a constructive way.
Thank you very much, Mr Ramsay. We really appreciate that.
Adrian Ramsay, co-leader of the Green Party. So, lots of constituencies mentioned. So these are all the candidates standing in the seats being targeted by the Greens. Waveney Valley, where Mr Ramsay is standing. Brighton Pavilion constituency, the Bristol Central constituency, and these are all the candidates standing in the North Herefordshire constituency. OK, you're right up to date.